Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. Last year, in fact almost 2 years ago, we looked at every Ferrari Formula 1 driver ever and listed them from worst to best. Now let's move on to another mega power of Formula 1, Williams. Given the changes at the team in the last few years, the death of Sir Frank Williams, and their slump from being a champagne-sipping dominant titan of the sport to general backmarking paupers, it seems like the right time to dive into the team's history and rate their drivers from worst to best, based solely on their time at Williams. And it is the Williams team that started in 1977, not the one before, nor the partnership with Walter Wolff. The Williams team that started in 1977 to the one that still exists in 2022. All 45 drivers to have raced with the team between then. Williams has had a lot less drivers than Ferrari, so this won't take as long. So let's take a look at every Williams Formula 1 driver ever, from worst to best. And this is part 1, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2. Number 45, Paul di Resta. I always thought Paul di Resta deserved more of a chance in Formula 1 than he got. He had 3 decent years in the midfield with Force India between 2011 and 2013 before being dumped on his arse. He made a return as a reserve driver for Williams in 2016, but I bet even he thought he'd never be in another Formula 1 race ever again. Well, when Felipe Massa went sick in Hungary in 2017, Paul di Resta stepped up despite not taking part in any of the practice sessions. He finished last but won in qualifying, struggled to keep up with the pack and retired on lap 60 with an oil leak. Did not make an impression in his one Williams drive. Number 44, Jack Aitken. Not only did Jack Aitken only have one race for Williams, it was his only drive in Formula 1, stepping in for George Russell, who in turn was stepping in for Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes for the 2020 Sakhir Grand Prix. Nothing really stood out. Aitken qualified low down, finished 16th and had a couple of spins. It was about as good as a surprise drive in a Williams in 2020 could be, but otherwise very forgettable. Number 43, Mario Andretti. The 1978 Formula 1 World Champion was an absolute star for Lotus, and if this was a list of the best Lotus Formula 1 drivers ever, Andretti is a contender for top 5. But sadly for the American, this is a list of Williams' best drivers, and once again Andretti only had a single drive for the team, racing in Long Beach for Williams in 1982, which was to be the last appearance but 2 for the 14-year veteran of Formula 1. He qualified well and was making progress, but a mistake led to Andretti hitting the wall, and his time at Williams was done with very little to show for it. Number 42, Jean-Louis Schlesser. I've done a whole video on the Frenchman's one and only appearance in Formula 1, stepping in for Nigel Mansell. The star of sports car racing had a baptism of fire in Formula 1. He wasn't quick, but he did manage to drag his car to the end of the race, down in 11th place, but he did take out a leading Ayrton Senna along the way. The Italian Grand Prix of 1988 was the only race that year McLaren didn't win, and part of the reason for that was Schlesser, but he did in a way make a name for himself. Number 41, Ayrton Senna. How dare I? How dare I put motor racing royalty at the bottom end of a list of racing drivers? Surely Senna should top almost every list going in Formula 1. While Senna's time at Williams ended in tragedy, after just 3 races for the team, the other 2 races did not go to plan for the Brazilian. It made perfect sense for Senna to sign for Williams in 1994. The team had been dominant in 92 and 1993, and with Mansell and Prost gone, a seat for the best driver at the best team makes perfect sense. He qualified in pole for all 3 races, but a mistake at the Brazilian Grand Prix and being taken out at the Pacific Grand Prix, followed by his tragic death at Imola, meant Senna never had any kind of success for Williams. Despite this, an S sat on the nose cone of Williams all the way to 2021, so his legacy to the team, despite the not so great results, was clearly important, because it's Ayrton Senna. Number 40, Jonathan Palmer. It is weird putting Jonathan Palmer ahead of Ayrton Senna. The father of F1 flop Jolyon Palmer, this single drive for Williams was actually Palmer's Formula 1 debut, given to him as a thank you after spending the last 2 years as a test driver for the team. He put in a solid if unspectacular showing for the team, qualifying nearly last but managing to come home 13th. Unfortunately, the rest of his career was spent with the likes of Ram and Zach Speed and Tyrrell, and he wouldn't have much success in Formula 1. Much like his son, Jolyon Palmer. Number 39, Martin Brundle. I feel like this is a pairing that made a lot of sense. Martin Brundle just feels right in a Williams. His career would have gone very differently if he raced for the Williams team instead of Riccardo Patrese, but as it happened he made just one appearance for the team. After a few years struggling with the likes of Tyrrell and Zakspeed, Brundle decided to take a year out to race for the TWR Jaguar in the World Sports Car Series. He did get a job as a Williams reserve driver and stood in for Nigel Mansell at Spa in 1988. He qualified well in 12th and finished just outside the points in 7th, but it was not enough to secure a drive, and Martin Brundle had a pretty decent career with Brabham, Benetton, McLaren and Jordan amongst others, and is now a beloved Formula 1 commentator and an icon of the sport in his own way. Number 38, Alessandro Zanardi. The Italian has had a really hard life, but it has had its achievements. His time in Formula 1 is not great on paper. Poor results with bad teams such as Minardi, a dying Lotus team, and a few early appearances for Jordan. But his only full season came in 1999 with Williams. Williams were the team to beat for most of the 1990s, but by 1999 they had fallen from a great height, and Zanardi had an incredibly tough year with the team. He'd scored no points, filled mostly with retirements, but there were some okay performances just outside the points, and this was about the level of Williams in 1999. Zanardi has had a couple of really bad accidents in his life, but he is a kart champion and has won 4 gold and 2 silvers in the Paralympic Games. You cannot define the Italian by his short time at Williams in Formula 1. Number 37, Antonio Pizzonia. The Brazilian was never given a full season in Formula 1 and didn't get much chance to show what he could do. He is the first point scorer on this list, and he scored most of them in his 9 races for Williams. He replaced Marc Genet for 4 races in 2004 and put in some respectable performances to finish 7th 3 times. In 2005 he replaced a concussed Nick Heidfeld for the last 5 races of the year. He managed to finish 7th again on his first reappearance in Italy, but a series of crashes marked the end of his time at Williams, and he didn't do a lot in the aftermath, mostly racing in Brazil. Number 36, Patrick Neve. The first Williams driver, the original. The Belgian was almost a guinea pig for the team. Despite the team missing a few races as they got ready, Patrick Neve raced in most of the 1977 season. He didn't score any points and even failed to qualify a couple of times, but there were some good performances in the Ford-powered March chassis, and Patrick Neve did his best for the team. He would never race in Formula 1 ever again, and his career after was unremarkable. Being the 36th best Williams driver may be the highlight of his career. Number 35, Sergei Sirotkin. The Russian was always pretty average, but had at least been competitive in GP2 and was an experienced F1 test driver. So Williams picked him up for 2018 and he scored a single point all year and was completely outclassed by a young Lance Stroll. It's no surprise they replaced him after 1 season, but in his defence, this was the level Williams were at, and that 1 point means he at least took something away from his short Formula 1 career. He only had a handful of endurance races in the year since and has pretty much disappeared without a trace. Number 34, Robert Kubica. I was so happy the pole was back. Kubica was always billed as the champion but never was, because of his horrifying rally accident that cut his career short. But he came back in 2019 for a full season with Williams, and like Sergei Sirotkin, he only scored 1 point. But it was the only point Williams scored all year, so they should be grateful. It was just great to see him get a Formula 1 drive, but it was always doubtful he was going to be competitive, and he was uncompetitive all year. But Robert Kubica is a fan favourite and is still racing and winning. Number 33, Marc Genet. The Spaniard stepped in for the concussed Ralf Schumacher. Do we need to question why so many Williams drivers get concussions? Genet had a couple of years at Minardi behind him, but I don't think anyone would guess that in 2003, in his only race in Italy, Marc Genet would qualify 5th and finish 5th. That's a class drive for a one-off by a Minardi reject. He came back for a couple of races in 2004 and stepped in for Ralf Schumacher again, but couldn't get the results and was replaced by the Petrobras-backed Antonio Pizzonia. Number 32, Derek Daly. The father of IndyCar driver Conor Daly raced in Formula 1 in the late 70s and early 80s. He jumped around between Team Ensign and Tyrrell before landing a dream drive with the Williams team, who had been so successful over the last few years. 1982 was to be Derek Daly's final year in Formula 1 and his most successful, taking 8 points for a Williams team that was simultaneously chasing wins for eventual champion Keke Rosberg. Derek Daly had come in to replace Carlos Reutemann and couldn't match the Argentinian, but he scored points in his single season and was an otherwise unspectacular but steady driver for the team. Number 31, Kazuki Nakajima. I mean, the fact he ran over his own pit crew is almost enough to relegate Nakajima to last place. But in his 2 and a bit seasons for Williams, Kazuki Nakajima underperformed for the Williams team. Considering the huge amount of success at Le Mans and in Japanese racing he's had since, maybe this was just a blip or Formula 1 just didn't suit. Whatever the reason, Nakajima had a torrid time in Formula 1. 2008 was not a terrible year. Williams were just a midfield team and Nakajima scored occasional points over the season, a best 6th in Australia, 9 points scored and 15th overall in the standings. Not great, but 2009 was worse. He'd scored no points and was last of the full-time drivers in the standings. Kazuki Nakajima should have done a whole lot more in Formula 1. Number 30, Nicholas Latifi. It's hard to judge Nicholas Latifi on the performances in his first 2 seasons in Formula 1. The 2019 Formula 2 runner-up scored a drive with Williams, whilst championship winner Nick De Vries was banished to the realm of Formula E. It was sort of a tainted chalice for Latifi, who has endured 2 years of backmarker action, whilst De Vries has gone on to be a Formula E champion for Mercedes. On the face of it, only 2 points finishes in 2 years looks pretty bad, but Williams haven't been able to provide a car capable of scoring points on a regular basis, and Latifi does at least finish races, and has gone on to score points. A best 7th at Hungary, but he has only retired from 6 out of 39 races. Hopefully he gets a few more years in Formula 1 and Williams can give him a chance to show what he has really got. Number 29, Jacques Laffite. The former Ligier driver is a Formula 1 legend. His 13-year Formula 1 career started in 1974 for the original Frank Williams Formula 1 team, but it doesn't count in this list. He got his first podium for the team in 1975, and he would take 6 wins over the next 7 years for French brand Ligier, finishing 4th in the series 3 years in a row, from 1979 to 1981. He only had 2 years with the later Williams team. Over the course of 1983 he scored a smattering of points, but only finished 11th. In 1984 the Williams was unreliable, and Jacques Laffite only managed a couple of points finishes, before surrendering back to Ligier for his final years. A massive crash at Brands Hatch in 1986 ended his career, but there is no doubting he was a fantastic racer, one of the best never to be champion. Number 28, Bruno Senna. Being the nephew of one of the greatest names in the sport is a double-edged sword. On the one hand you basically have guaranteed employment opportunities, but undoubtedly you will end up being compared to your greater uncle. Bruno actually fared better than Uncle Ayrton in a Williams. He didn't die for a start. That's cruel, but Bruno Senna has only a single season at Williams in 2012. He scored points throughout the year, but harshly was not kept on beyond 2012. He only finished 14 points behind teammate Pastor Maldonado, despite the Venezuelan winning the Spanish Grand Prix. So maybe controversial, but I really think Bruno Senna deserved more of a chance than he got in Formula 1. He's gone on to Formula E and has even had some success in endurance racing, but his career has fallen way short of his much more famous uncle. Number 27, Alexander Wurz. The Austrian had his most successful years in the late 90s with the Benetton team, and in the years that followed was a test driver for both McLaren and Williams. A little strange then that he was given a seat with Williams in 2007. Yes, he was their test driver, but he had only won Formula 1 race with McLaren in the 6 years prior. A podium finish nonetheless. He only scored a few points finishes, but this did include a podium in Canada. Wurz didn't get to see out the year, being replaced by Kazuki Nakajima, kind of like replacing a rotten tomato with a slightly more rotten tomato. Either way, the salad is ruined. This was the end of Wurz's Formula 1 career. He took a second win at Le Mans in 2009 and took sporadic races both at Le Mans and in World Rallycross all the way up to 2018. Number 26, Lance Stroll. Another currently racing Canadian, no longer with Williams, and Lance Stroll has improved since his Williams days. There was always a stigma of a pay driver who was in Formula 1 because of his daddy's money, but Lance Stroll did have some results behind him. He was a Toyota Racing Series champion, as well as the Formula 3 European Championship, so he wasn't some midfield junior runner with a big wallet behind him. His first year with Williams was the best. In 2017 he managed to get a few points finishes in the middle of the season, including a podium in Azerbaijan. 2018 was a downturn for Williams in general, and whilst Lance Stroll got a couple of points finishes, it was a huge disappointment. Since joining Racing Point / Aston Martin, and still funded by Daddy's money, he had a really good season in 2020 but took a step backwards in 2021. Honestly, he's entering his 6th Formula 1 season in 2022, and I still don't really know how good he is. But for Williams, he is average, and therefore about in the middle of the list. Number 25, Jenson Button. It is a really strange thought that Jenson Button began his Formula 1 career with Williams all the way back in the year 2000. It was only one season, but he looked like a good racer, scoring regular points and managing to finish 8th overall. Not bad for a debut year, and he was a good backup for more experienced teammate Ralf Schumacher. Despite some good results, Jenson Button was dumped in favour of Juan Pablo Montoya and went on loan to Benetton. He moved around a bit, heading to BAR, who became Honda, and finally Brawn in 2009, when Jenson Button finally won the World Championship. He spent the rest of his career with McLaren, before retiring after a single drive in 2017. He runs his own team these days, and happily they have had successes here and there, and hopefully it is something he continues with and has even more future success. Number 24, Nico Hülkenberg. Another good driver Williams dumped after a single season. Nico Hülkenberg won it all on his way to Formula 1. First was the A1 GP Series, then the Formula 3 Euro Series, and finally GP2. After a year test driving for Williams in 2009, he signed for the team in 2010, and he was good. He scored regular points and got on pole at the Brazilian Grand Prix. He dropped to 8th, but he still got on pole in a Williams, something that hadn't been done for 5 years before that race. But now, instead of keeping the talented German youngster, they signed Pastor Maldonado, who would win a race for the team, but Hülkenberg ended up as a reserve driver for Force India, before getting a full-time drive with the team. He'd also raced for Sauber and Renault, and is still a reserve driver for Aston Martin in 2022, and is often linked with a substitute role with pretty much every team that needs someone in a hurry. But he is the driver who has competed in the most races without ever getting on the podium. 179 races in Formula 1 and no podiums. For a driver who constantly performs well, that is a weight tagged to a chain and wrapped around Hülkenberg's neck. Maybe he'll be back in a race seat one day and he can finally take that podium, but honestly, time is running out. Number 23, Rubens Barrichello. They signed the highly experienced Brazilian race winner and multiple-time championship runner-up for the last 2 years of a very, very long career. Rubens Barrichello had won 16 races with Ferrari and Brawn, and had completed 17 championships before doing 2 years with Williams in 2010 and 2011. He wasn't exactly past it and washed up either, having finished 3rd overall with Brawn in 2009. Williams weren't quite on the level of what Brawn managed, but Rubens did a respectable job for the team in his first season, scoring points more often than not, but his final year was poor, with Williams way off the pace. Rubens only scored 4 points and finished 17th overall, and it was a sad way for his Formula 1 career to end. But since then he has been racing in the Brazilian Stock Car Series, where he won the championship in 2014 and has won 16 races just like in Formula 1. He still races in the series in 2022. Number 22, George Russell. The Golden Boy. There has been a lot of hype for George Russell since he debuted for Williams all the way back in 2019. The GP3 and Formula 2 champion did take 48 races to score a point for Williams, but a car that wasn't much good did hold him back. He was unlucky to lose out to Robert Kubica for the only points scored by Williams in 2019, before a year as the ultimate backmarkers in 2020 when he and Latifi couldn't get close to the points. He did manage to nearly win a race for Mercedes when he subbed in for Lewis Hamilton, but Mercedes sabotaged that. With Williams he finally scored in Hungary in 2021, but behind teammate Latifi, before a few more good results on pace at a few races and some amazing qualifying performances. He did score Williams' first podium since 2017 and their first second place since Felipe Massa came second in Abu Dhabi in 2014, but it was at Spa when the race was basically not run under very wet conditions. He moved to Mercedes for 2022 and begins a new chapter of his life. Number 21, Nick Heidfeld. Another utility German race driver who got a single season for Williams. Much like Nico Hülkenberg, Nick Heidfeld won everything he could on the way to Formula 1. The German Formula 3 champion and international F3000 champion signed with Prost for a terrible year 2000 before finding his feet with Sauber for the next few years. After a year with Jordan, he signed with Williams in 2005. He would take 3 podiums and score the odd points finish in the first half of the year before a testing accident followed by a motorcycle crash led to him missing the end of the season, with Antonio Pizzonia taking his place. Even though he missed 5 races, he only finished 8 points behind teammate Mark Webber, but left Williams for BMW Sauber in 2006, where he would have his best years, even finishing 5th overall in 2007. He'd see out his career with a brief return to Sauber and half a year with Renault, and as the driver with the most podiums never to have won a race. He moved to Formula E and Venturi for a couple of years, not winning there either. In fact, for a driver who won constantly in the junior formula, from 2000 to 2022, he has won 1 race in motorsport. A single win in the American Le Mans Series in 2013 with Rebellion alongside Nicolas Prost and Neil Jani. Number 20, Pastor Maldonado. The last man to win a race for Williams a decade ago in 2012 in Spain. And you know what? He won that race on pure race pace alone. Why could they only do it on that one occasion? He even took pole position, and Williams set their garage on fire in celebration, all by accident. That win definitely boosted him up this list, because without that result, he achieved absolute garbage. 1 point in 2011 and 1 point in 2013. In 58 races for Williams, he only scored points in 7 races, which just makes it even more amazing that everything came together for him to win in Spain in 2012. To be honest, Williams weren't competitive in 2011, and Rubens Barrichello didn't do much better than Maldonado. And he did finish ahead of Bruno Senna in 2012, just barely. The final straw was 2013, when Maldonado finished behind young Finnish teammate Valtteri Bottas, who himself only had 1 points finish. So again, Williams weren't competitive. What Maldonado did gain was a reputation for crashing that he was never able to shake free from. After 2 more disappointing years with Lotus, he moved on from Formula 1 and has done some endurance racing without much success. How did he win a Formula 1 race? Number 19, Mark Webber. The Australian never really achieved much in the 3 years in Formula 1 before he joined Williams. I mean, the first one was with Minardi, so you can't expect much, so a miracle 5th place in Australia may point to a future Formula 1 race winner. But 2 mediocre years with Jaguar was apparently enough to convince Williams to sign Mark Webber for a couple of years. In fact, from 2002 to 2008, Mark Webber finished no higher than 10th in the final standings and only had a couple of podiums to his name. With Williams, he consistently scored points in his first season and even grabbed a podium in Monaco. His second year wasn't as good, but Webber once again beat his teammate. It wasn't stellar, and what he achieved later with Red Bull, along with a runner-up at Le Mans and a WEC championship win, the end of Mark Webber's career was definitely the best part of his career, but he did a respectable job for Williams and breaks the top 20 on this list. Number 18, Nico Rosberg. I think looking at his time at Williams, you'd never guess that Nico Rosberg would be world champion someday, but then I guess looking at his Minardi days, you'd never guess Fernando Alonso would be who he is. But in his 4 years at Williams, he broke the top 10 in the final standings twice and got a couple of podiums. He was consistent and scored points more often than not, especially in 2009. Whilst not getting on the podium, he scored points at every race bar 6 and finished 7th overall. He left Williams in 2010 for Mercedes as they entered the sport and took 23 wins, sparring with teammate Lewis Hamilton, finally taking the championship in 2016 before immediately retiring and becoming a corporate shill for Mercedes in his new role as a Sky Sports pundit. Number 17, Felipe Massa. Last year when I did my list of Ferrari drivers, Felipe Massa managed to get 18th out of 77. Here for Williams, he goes one better in 17th. For all I have said about Felipe Massa in the past, and it remains true that he hasn't won any kind of motor race since 2008, he still did a pretty good job everywhere he went. He drove to a standard, scored points and got podiums, although sadly no wins for the Williams team. After many successful years with Sauber and Ferrari, Massa moved to Williams for his final 4 years in Formula 1. He scored points on a regular basis, as it was the last time to date that Williams were really competitive. He would take 5 podiums in his first 2 years, but he never beat teammate Valtteri Bottas in the final standings in his 3 years partnered with the Finn. He would overcome Lance Stroll in his final year and would head into the world of Formula E and Brazil's stock car. And as previously mentioned, he has not won a race for 14 years. Massa did a good job for Williams. He managed to get a 6th and a 7th in the final standings, and he left before the really bad turn down in form for the team. Not a bad way to end a really long career. Number 16, Valtteri Bottas. I just mentioned that the Finn beat Felipe Massa every year for the 3 years they were teammates at Williams. He also beat Pastor Maldonado in his first season, although a medal will not be presented for that fact. Williams had a bad 2013, and I do wonder if they thought about ditching the Finn at that point. It was a good choice not to, because in 2014 he would get 6 podiums and score points at every race except 2. After finishing 4th in the standings that year, a little bit of hype grew around Bottas, and 2015 was pretty good too. He got a couple of podiums and again was ever consistent and managed to get to 5th. His final year was a step backwards for Williams as a team, and Bottas was a bit deeper in the midfield, but again almost always scoring points. After 2016 he replaced Nico Rosberg at Mercedes as wingman to Lewis Hamilton. He took 10 wins and finished runner-up twice, but now in 2022 he is back in the midfield with the Alfa Romeo team, and it's going to be interesting to see how he does. Number 15, David Coulthard. Oh, how I wish I could put this big chin Scottish numpty lower on the list, but he actually did alright. Thrust into the limelight in 1994 as a part-time replacement for Ayrton Senna, no pressure, he shared the second car with Nigel Mansell for the rest of the 1994 season, getting a best second place in Portugal. He'd moved to a full-time drive in 1995 and had a really good season. A few podiums, his first win again in Portugal, and 3rd in the championship. He'd moved to McLaren for the next 9 years, taking 12 more wins, and finishing runner-up in the championship in 2001. He left for 4 final years at Red Bull, not achieving much, and finished his racing career with 3 years of DTM, where he wasn't very good. He's now an annoying TV pundit. Number 14, Clay Regazzoni. The underrated Swiss legend only had a single season for Williams in 1979. The first year they ran a 2-car operation, and Clay Regazzoni played a big part in the development of the team into a championship winning machine. He himself took the team's first ever Formula 1 win at Silverstone. He was still replaced at year end by Carlos Reutemann, who had also replaced Regazzoni at Ferrari previously. Regazzoni hopefully never introduced his wife to Reutemann. The Swiss driver would retire from racing in 1980 after a big crash in his Ensign at Long Beach that left him paralysed from the waist down, but he still had enough passion left to race in Dakar and sports car racing with hand-controlled cars. An underrated legend. Number 13, Thierry Boutsen. After a very good year with Benetton in 1988, Thierry Boutsen replaced Nigel Mansell at Williams for the 1989 season. By all accounts, he was a success story, taking 2 wins in his first season and matching teammate Riccardo Patrese, finishing the year 5th overall. In 1990, the Belgian driver would take a single win at Hungary, but the Williams had slipped a bit further back in the field, and Boutsen finished the year 6th, being swapped for Mansell again at the end of the year. After this, Boutsen would see out his Formula 1 days with Ligier and Jordan, before heading to some success in sports car racing. Number 12, Heinz-Harald Frentzen. Talk about joining the team a tiny bit too late. Frentzen arrived at Williams in 1997 after a few decent years with Sauber. Replacing Damon Hill, the reigning champion in the top team, should come with a lot of pressure, but Frentzen got plenty of podiums and took his first Formula 1 win. He finished runner-up to teammate Jacques Villeneuve in the final standings, but it was a successful first year nonetheless. His second year was nowhere near as good, Williams weren't as competitive, and apart from a single podium, it was a bad year for the team and Frentzen. He left to take wins with Jordan before making some bad career decisions by joining Prost and Arrows, before returning to Sauber for a final year in 2003. Number 11, Riccardo Patrese. Once upon a time the most experienced man in Formula 1 history until Rubens Barrichello beat his record, Patrese was around for a long while and was a good servant for Williams. The second driver throughout his time with the team, but a reliable hand doing a stand-up job. The Italian would start his Formula 1 career with Shadow and Arrows, before finding success with Brabham, taking 2 wins in Monaco in 1982 and South Africa in 1983. Despite this, the unreliability of the Brabham meant Patrese never really featured high in the championship. and he'd jump between Brabham and Alfa Romeo for the next few years before joining Williams at the last race of 1987, standing in for Mansell. He stayed with the team in 1988 but struggled to perform before Williams really kicked on in 1989. Patrese scored multiple podiums and finished third in the championship. He'd take his first of 4 wins for the team in 1990, finished third in the championship in 1991, then second in 1992. He left Williams for a final year with Benetton. Many podiums and wins for the Williams team, one of the best second drivers ever. Number 10, Keke Rosberg. And now we move into the champions section of the list, and a man who really didn't deserve to be champion. Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Pironi should have been fighting for this championship, but Villeneuve died and Pironi was seriously injured and had to retire during the 1982 season, leaving Keke Rosberg and his single race win to take the crown. This after a few years driving for teams such as Theodore Racing, ATS, Wolf Racing and Fittipaldi Automotive. He joined Williams in 1982 and took a win at Dijon. This was enough to win the championship. He spent 3 more years with Williams, winning a total of 5 races and taking a third in the 1985 championship before leaving for McLaren in 1986 and retiring after a final mediocre year. Keke Rosberg is definitely one of the luckiest champions ever, but he did spawn a world champion's son, so maybe it is in their blood. Number 9, Jacques Villeneuve. Am I going to get a lot of hate for saying Jacques Villeneuve is one of the most overrated drivers ever? I'm going to say it anyway. Yes, he was the 1995 Indy 500 winner and Kart Series champion, and he managed 2 good years in Formula 1, but was Villeneuve ever really that great? In 1996 he finished second on his debut and won his 4th ever race, the first of 4 wins in his debut year, taking second in the championship. In 1997 he'd take 7 wins and beat Michael Schumacher in the championship. Up to this point, he is a better prospect than Lewis Hamilton. 1998 was a bad year for both Williams and Villeneuve, only 2 podiums and the team was way off the pace, and Villeneuve just started making poor career choices, joining BAR and scoring no points in 1999. He stayed with the team until 2003 and would take a couple of podiums, but had little to no success with the team. He'd raced for Renault and Sauber, but wasn't great and was replaced by Robert Kubica mid-2006. He has done very little since. Number 8, Juan Pablo Montoya. Much like Jacques Villeneuve, Montoya came into Formula 1 as a Kart Series champion and Indy 500 winner. Unlike Villeneuve, he didn't walk into a team dominating Formula 1, instead debuting for Williams in 2001 during the Schumacher years. Montoya was often impressive but struggled to finish races early on, but took his first win at Monza and finished 6th overall. In 2002, Montoya scored regular podiums on his way to 3rd in the championship, matching that in 2003, but with the addition of 2 more wins including Monaco. His final year with the team was mixed. He scored points at most races and took his final Williams win in Brazil, but only finished 5th in the championship before spending a year and a half at McLaren and getting sacked for causing chaos. Number 7, Carlos Reutemann. He may have stolen all his jobs from Clay Regazzoni, but Carlos Reutemann sure knew how to drive a race car. He drove for Williams at the tail end of his career after years of racing for Brabham, Ferrari and Lotus. He came to Williams having taken 4 wins for Brabham and 5 for Ferrari, finishing 3rd in the championship in 1975 for the former and in 1978 for the latter. He joined Williams in 1980 alongside eventual champion Alan Jones and finished 3rd again overall. 1981 was his best year, finishing 2nd overall, and if Alan Jones had given him a hand, he may have been champion. He turned up for 1982 and finished 2nd at South Africa, but after 1 more race retired, with reasons spanning from the Falklands War to his political career to just being fed up with racing all being thrown around. He was a successful politician until his death a year ago. Number 6, Alain Prost. The Professor only had 1 season for Williams and it was a dominant one. Not only did it kill Nigel Mansell's career as he left Williams because he didn't want to be partnered with Prost, it also stopped Ayrton Senna joining the team until 1994. Prost kept up the success Mansell managed in 1992, taking 7 wins and beating Senna and teammate Damon Hill. He would leave straight away after with his 4th World Championship and an end to his 13-year career. May have been evil, but he was a champion. Number 5, Ralf Schumacher. The last non-champion on the list, but Ralf Schumacher was a successful and faithful servant to the Williams team. Overshadowed by the success of other Williams drivers and his own brother, Ralf Schumacher often flies under the radar. After 2 decent years with Jordan, he joined Williams in 1999 and performed okay. Not great, but okay. He got podiums, scored points and finished 6th overall, doing the same in 2000 and climbing higher to 5th. Schumacher would take his first win in 2001 at Imola and would take 2 more that year, with another win in 2002 and 2 more in 2003. He wasn't having a great 2004 when a big crash in America led to him being injured for most of the year, and he would sign with Toyota to see out the rest of his Formula 1 career. He may have not had the overall success of other drivers, but he was consistent, took wins and did well in the championship at a time when Williams were not exactly at their highest level. Ralf Schumacher was a pretty great Williams driver. Number 4, Alan Jones. The second ever Williams driver joined the team in 1978 after having taken a win for the Shadow team the previous year. Other than that, he'd accomplished nothing special in his previous years, in Formula 1 with Harry Stiller, Embassy Hill, Team Surtees and Shadow, but he did take a second place in his first year with Williams. In 1979, Williams hit their stride and Alan Jones would take 4 wins on his way to 3rd in the championship. In 1980, 5 more wins sealed the championship for Jones before a final year in 1981, where he took his final 2 wins and 3rd again. He decided to leave Formula 1 after that, and should have stayed gone, but decided to make a return, first with a single race with Arrows in 1983, before a season and a half with the old Haas team in 1985 and 1986. Forgetting that and focusing on his time with Williams, 11 wins, a championship, Alan Jones is the best Australian to race for Williams. Number 3, Damon Hill. It's almost amazing that Damon Hill got a job after a terrible first year with Brabham, but his dad being a 3-time champion and the fact Brabham were on their deathbed got him a drive at Williams for 1993 alongside Alain Prost. Damon Hill was good from the start, regularly on the podium, and took 3 wins in a row mid-season, on his way to 3rd in the championship behind Prost and Senna. In 1994, now with Senna at Williams, Damon Hill was expecting to be the number 2 driver again, but after Senna's death he became the focal point of Williams and laid a strong title challenge against the Benetton of Michael Schumacher, ending at Adelaide when they drove into each other. In his first 2 years in Formula 1, Hill had already partnered Prost, Senna and Mansell, and taken 9 wins and finished runner-up in the championship. Now in 1995, he was partnered with David Coulthard. He'd take 4 more wins and 2nd in the championship again, but finished a long way off Schumacher. He'd finally take the championship in 1996 with 8 wins, but his time with Williams was up. A drive at Arrows was a bit of a downturn despite good performances, and Hill ended his career with Jordan. He only had a brief time with Williams in retrospect, but Williams were in top form, and 21 wins in 4 years along with a Drivers' Championship is a pretty good return for Damon Hill. Number 2, Nelson Piquet. In 2022, Nelson Piquet is a controversial figure. From Crashgate with his son to more recent issues, I'm sure a lot of people don't like the Brazilian, but he knew how to drive a race car and took some great successes with Williams. He joined Williams in 1986, already with 2 championships with Brabham in his belt and 13 race wins. His first season alongside Nigel Mansell was a tough battle between the Williams pair and Ayrton Senna, with Senna beating Mansell by just 2 points, with Piquet a single point behind his teammate. Nelson Piquet managed 4 wins, which is more than he managed in 1987, when he only took 3, but he did win his 3rd championship. In fact, he finished on the podium 11 times out of 16, a really impressive feat. He left Williams to join Lotus and finally Benetton, taking 3 more wins before retiring after 1991. His family name is survived by a whole host of Piquet still racing, and for their sake, with as little intervention from a senior Piquet as possible. Number 1, Nigel Mansell. The obvious number 1. Red 5, Mr. Mustache, Nigel Mansell, a story of almost winning the championship so many times before finally doing it in 1992. The driver who raced for Williams more than any other driver, took more wins and poles for the team than anyone, should have had more championships than anyone. Nigel Mansell is a legend who is almost synonymous with Williams' Formula 1 efforts. He joined the team in 1985 after 5 strong if unspectacular years with Lotus. He took 2 wins in his first campaign for Williams, but it was 1986 when things started to go right. After leading for most of the campaign, it was a puncture at the final race in Adelaide that lost him the championship. He performed well in 1987 but lost out to teammate Piquet before the new Judd engines destroyed Williams' chances for the 1988 campaign, with Mansell retiring from all but 2 races, as well as missing another 2. He switched to Ferrari for a couple of years before returning to Williams in 1991. He battled with Senna for most of the season, but finished second for the third time in his career. In 1992, the Williams dominated and Nigel Mansell finally became champion. He won the kart series in 1993, before returning for a part-time drive in 1994 in the wake of Senna's death. He took his final win in his final Williams drive at Adelaide. He made a couple of appearances for McLaren in 1995 but soon retired. One of the all-time legends of the sport, one of the greatest British drivers, and an argument can be made for one of the greatest of all time. A hard charger who usually pushed the limits a little too much. So that was the final part of the every Williams driver ever list. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Did I get it right, or is there anything you'd do differently? Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have more F1 reviews coming up, as well as everything else motorsport related. Leave a like and tell your friends. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.